This is a show about facing fear, unlocking courage, and taking action.
Courage isn't necessarily a daunting thing.
It's going to give you more purpose. It's going to give you more drive.
It feels like making a courageous decision is going to get you closer to who you aspire to be.
It's knowledge plus faith plus action equals courage.
Let's suppose that in your neighborhood, there's been a crime that happens in a local park. The response to that by the local neighborhood can be, then I'm scared, I'm not going to that park anymore. Guess what you've done? You've made the park monumentally more dangerous by doing that. People get afraid, they tend to withdraw, when one of the best responses is to actually connect.
You know, often when I describe the business components of my life, not the podcast components of my life, there's been many times where we will say we're corporate fear fighters. Like, that's what we do. We're looking for fear inside an organization. Best case scenarios, what is the largest fear that you're willing to address versus suppress? And like, let's go fight that fear. And 68 miles north of me right now at Chapman University is a guy that's been studying fear itself, Dr. Christopher Bader. You're professor of sociology. Do you call it, like, if you're an author, what do you call multi-author? I mean, you've written plenty of books at this point. What do we call this, right? But I've been busy up there, no?
Yes. We've been very, very busy working on a lot of different projects.
Some really cool stuff too. I mean, we're now a decade into the Chapman Survey of American Fears. And I think that's how I stumbled into your work. It's always good to know this, right? It was the New York Times article that came out at the beginning of last year about what we are afraid of. I was like, what? Wait a minute. Hold on. I got to meet this guy. And so, again, you're not just studying fear, you're studying other things as well and teaching other things. But I was fascinated by what you all are doing and how you're looking at fears. Many questions for you. For example, you've looked at 90 fears. Talk to me about the study itself, if you don't mind. First of all,
sure.
Good to see you. How's it going?
Good to see you too. Good to see you.
Jump right into it.
Yeah, sure. You're right. We've been doing the survey for 10 years. The 11th wave is currently what we call in the field. People are responding to it right now. And the idea was to try to understand what people are afraid of, because when my co-investigators and I, when we were looking at what wasn't receiving enough study out there, we thought fear. That what we were saying was that every Halloween there will be a one-off story about fear of ghosts. And if there's a natural disaster, there will be a one-off study about fear of earthquakes. But what we thought was missing was some sort of understanding of how these things morph and change over time, what we can learn about what people are afraid of and how they handle those fears, irrespective of the specific events. So we do ask about. Now, to be honest, we have asked about at least 88 fears. It might be, at times there's a couple that we have dropped because just nobody seems to be afraid of them. Like zombies is no longer on the list.
Oh, that's good to know.
But
I talk about zombies a lot of my keynotes, so that zombies are off the list for now.
Zombies are off the list for now. But so those 88 fears include everything from what you might call phobias, reptiles, snakes, heights, enclosed spaces, to events, types of things that could happen, such as an earthquake or a major tornado, to things that could happen in your life, people you love dying, becoming ill yourself, people you know becoming seriously ill, to what you might call world events, government corruption, economic disasters. So it's very wide-ranging because we wanted to get a sense of where do all these things stand in relation to each other? Because one of the stories that we hear a lot is, it's a very popular sort of meme that public speaking is the number one fear that people have. And that's not even close to true once it's considered amongst a lot of other things.
Well, I have a theory on that as a guy that does some public speaking. I almost wonder if it's similar to zombies. Like, I'm not going to do public speaking, therefore I'm not afraid of public speaking.
Sure.
Right. Versus, you had rattled off some of the top 10 from the 24 survey, which we're going to get into in a minute here.
Okay.
In the spirit of, humanizing Christopher Bader. Let's give me like a little color. Where'd you grow up? Like when you think about your life, I joke sometimes with me. I'm like, if you asked me to write down like 100 things that I thought I would do for a living, courage would not have been on the list for me. I would have been the courage business when I grow up. So I imagine you being in the fears business, or at least auditing fear. So I'm curious, like how you got to where you are and where you grew up and all that good stuff.
Sure. I grew up in the Seattle area. For anyone who actually is from up there, I grew up in Linwood. That'll mean something to people. Are sometimes annoyed when you say you grew up in the big city when really you were in a suburb outside of it. I didn't know I wanted to go into academia till fairly late, until I just happened upon, I was just really interested in, at that particular time, religion and the way religions grow and change. And I was in a bookstore, ran into a book by a scholar named Rodney Stark, who'd written this really fascinating book on religion, and became so interested, I decided I wanted to be an academic, and found out where he was teaching. Ultimately, that was at the University of Washington, and got my degree there. And yeah, I taught at Baylor in Texas for 9 years. And
nice.
Then I've been at Chapman ever since. I've been here since 2012.
Texas to California, there's a story there too, but we don't have time, I think, for that one.
It was not hard to move from Texas to California, I can tell you.
We're keep it a short story. It's funny that you talk about, your curiosities on faith. So the first 6 months of writing Return on Courage came from, I didn't love the dictionary definition of courage. Mm-hmm. So if you look at the dictionary definition, it's the ability to do something that frightens you. And although I find that to be accurate, 95% of us don't want to do terrifying things. And where was utility in that definition? So we ended up coming up with 3 levers. There's knowledge plus faith plus action equals courage. And the way we talk about faith, and I'm like, well, I don't mean it in the religious sense. I mean it in the inner belief sense. Like, what do you, right? If I think this, which is the knowledge side, and I feel this, which is the faith side, but you don't do anything about it, which is supposed to be the action side, that's paralysis. But when you hear that definition of knowledge, faith, and action, and again, I'm curious to get into the main thing, but where does your mind go?
I think that's a good definition of courage, actually. Courage certainly does require knowledge. It requires knowledge of the challenge that you're facing, knowledge of what the actual issues are. We'll talk about this, I'm sure, later, but a large part of fear is the unknown. And whether it's endemic to courage or whether it's part of making yourself courageous, I think is knowledge. That really resonates with me. Faith in the wider sense, whether that's someone's personal religious faith or just faith in their own abilities or willingness to appreciate their own abilities. I think that those two things certainly are part. And I definitely appreciate that ultimately it's translating into action, because that's where a lot stops, right? I'm someone who enjoys trying things that are challenging, enjoys trying things that I'll find scary or difficult to do. And I think that can be the hardest part is just actually taking the action.
Well, like doing a survey of fears. And I would say, and one of the most interesting components of the acronym CSAF, which is Chapman Survey of American Fears, to me was actually the word American. Like, I think that's right. Like if you ran this internationally, obviously the fears probably look different. Is that something that you would consider chewing on at some point?
We are working on that right now. So I can't say too much about it yet because it's all in the working phase. But yes, the goal is for us to try to expand and get a sense of which of these things are culturally specific, which of them are more sort of human in nature, these fears.
And just to give you a tint of color of where this is coming from, I don't have the time or the resources, but I wanted to look at how does courage play across country and continents as well. Where does legacy win versus where people can actually leap. So I'm like, I wonder if he's thinking about taking this thing overseas. All right, let's talk about the list. And well, maybe even before we do that, can you give me a little of the just behind the curtain of what went into making sure you're running this race the right way and that the sample was like solid? Can you give me just a little color on that?
Sure. And in terms of figuring out what we're going to ask about, we're continually running focus groups and doing interviews so that we can get a sense of if there's major things that we're missing that people say that they're afraid of. And so that's something that's ongoing. It's a continual challenge when you're running a survey project like this, because if you change the wording, then you can't compare across years. And one of the things we want to do is be able to look at how these fears are changing over time, which ones are growing, which ones are receding. So every year it's a challenge between we have certain content that we know we should keep the same because we want to, in 30 years, be able to see how a particular fear manifested in 2015. In addition to that, we're always looking to see, we always have room on the survey for what we call modules or new information. And so we will use that space to ask about something which is very current at the same time. So it's an evolving instrument with a large portion of it is fixed. It is asked of a random national sample of adults. So one thing we can't talk about is we can't talk about the fears of kids. And this is a random national sample that is also representative. And what that means is that the sample has the same percentage and is weighted accordingly so that we can, the percentage of our respondents are equivalent to the percentage of respondents of different racial and ethnic groups. Our respondents look the same in terms of gender breakdown, income breakdown, because that's really important. We want to make sure that the fears of older people look very different from the fears of younger people. The fears of wealthier people look very different from less wealthy people. So we wanted to make sure that we had a representative sample so that we weren't misstating when we talked about what Americans tend to fear.
What's the numbers? What's the numbers, if you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, it varies by year a little bit always because there'll be people who drop out. We probably make them afraid. I don't know, but
they're afraid of
surgery. The sample ranges from about 1,200 to 1,400. That's the sweet spot sample you need to get enough people in different categories to be able to have a representative sample.
And then when you go into it, and forgive me for having even asked, but like, are you staying always at the 1,200? Like, are you always providing commentary on we the people, or are you carving it out into different subsets?
We carve it out all the time. In fact, many dozens of articles written from the fear data, both from myself and my colleagues, and we make the data public so that anyone can look at it and use it. And so there's articles written that I haven't even seen by other scholars. We feel like that's an important thing, is to provide this as a tool. We want the understanding to be better, not just for us to write things. And most of those articles, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to say, okay, what does this type of person fear? What are the fears of, I've seen articles, what are the fears of men and women regarding crime and how do they differ? How do different religious groups differ in their types of fears? So if we're talking about different types of Christian groups, evangelicals versus mainline versus Hindus versus Muslims, how do they differ in their fears? A lot of the studies are doing that, sort of carving up the sample in different ways, looking at how different characteristics are related to fear.
So I can only imagine that you're like, hey, my job is to be unemotional about serving up the reality of the data, and here we go. But like, when you kind of look at it and you look at what you're like, oh, this one's pretty sticky. This is a pretty curious or interesting insight that's come out of it. Is there one or two that really pops for you?
One that really pops for me would be fear of crime. The reason being that we ask about different crimes. We're not just asking, are you afraid of crime? We're asking if you're afraid of being murdered by a stranger, murdered by someone you know, sexually assaulted by a stranger, by someone you know, if you're afraid of being robbed, if you're afraid of your house being broken into, if you're afraid of a carjacking. So we ask about a bunch of different fears. And we've also asked over time, we've asked people's opinion about whether these types of crimes are going up or going down in terms of their frequency. And this is, I don't very often say this because people's fears are people's fears, but Americans are just wrong about crime. They're afraid of the things that are going down and think those same things are going up. For example, Americans are far more afraid of being predated upon by a stranger than by someone they know. And if they are preyed upon, it's almost certainly going to be by somebody they know. And the reason I think that those types of fears are harmful, and the fact that Americans really do believe that serial killings are going way up, that stranger abductions of children are going way up. That is absolutely not true. Both of those things are going way down, and they have been going down precipitously over time. Is that I think those are fears that I think are actually dangerous because they literally put our eyes in the wrong place. And they lead us to misallocate our resources, that we should be spending far more money on domestic violence than we do on serial killings. But Americans are much more attracted to stories of serial killings. They gain their attention. And so it sort of puts their eyes in the wrong place. So that is probably the one that shocked me the most when I saw it, because others, I didn't really know what was going to happen. But the crime items, I was really surprised on just how far off Americans are from reality in terms of what they're afraid of.
And well, first of all, I'm kind of I'm happy to hear this. I mean, in some ways, you're happy to hear this and it's the other way, right? Like, but I have a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old, and it's definitely something that on the neighborhood mom chat, I call them the Mafia.
Sure.
The Mafia talks about this stuff all the time. And it's not to, like, I've kind of felt like, yeah, this makes sense. Like, our media consumption habits seem to go way up. And these are the stories that we're telling, right? These are the stories.
Exactly.
And we're fearful of those things and then assume it's happening in society. And this is not to vilify Hollywood, but it's also reality. These are the stuff that we're watching. So is that number, like, when you share this, is this consistent over the decade, or is this like in the last 2 years?
No, this is consistent, that Americans are consistently just fearful of the wrong. I mean, I shouldn't say wrong types of crimes. I mean, that it's a difficult thing to talk about because if I'm not careful, it can sound like I'm suggesting that serial killings are not terrible or something, or
Right.
But they are very rare, and Americans don't think they are. They think that they're very common, and they're worried about stranger danger, and stranger danger itself is a dangerous phenomenon, because when we keep thinking the other is the person who's going to prey on us, that leads to xenophobia and other sorts of fears. And
well, the domestic violence comment too. I mean, both of those insights. If I'm LA, there's your story right there. Like you'd think that they'd be telling stories to shine a light on those topics. I'm sure they are, but like, there's something there for sure. Was there anything the other way that we got wrong? Like, we actually aren't afraid of this, but we should be afraid of this?
I think one of the things that surprised me the most was just realizing how low actually the most commonly discussed fears are. So as we were discussing before, fear of public speaking, fear of heights. I didn't think they would be that low. They're hovering towards the middle of our list of 88. They're very far down there. And what I realized is that the reason that was happening was that typically when you would see a news story about it, they were only asking about fear of public speaking and heights and black cats or whatever else they were asking about. And so people were sort of relatively ranking those things, right? And public speaking was at the top of a small list of other things, which are sort of minor things. And so I was expecting those still to show up fairly high on the list, but they've just never been particularly of much consequence.
I'm looking at the top 10 from 2024 right now. Before we kind of go through these, you had said, you've done this now for 11 years. Talk me through something that's wildly changed from when you did the survey in year one to today. Sure.
I think that I would say two things, if I may. That one is people are just generally becoming more afraid. We've noticed, and that's unfortunate. That it used to be that the most common fear on our list was still hovering around 50% or a little less. Now, everything on our top 10 list, more than half of Americans are afraid of those things. So, and we're noticing when we do analyses to see how many things people are afraid of. So if you had taken the survey, I can look at your responses and say, well, guess what? Ryan is very afraid of 23 of the 88 things on our list. And that number is going up. Someone's sort of fear quotient is going up. We had hoped that by entering this conversation, we could do something to help quell what we saw was a tide of fear in our society. And unfortunately, it's just that level of fear overall seems to be inching up. And I think the other big surprise is not one of change, but one of consistency, which is that almost since the very beginning, corrupt government officials has been the number one fear of Americans. It's just always there, sitting at the top. It's just now it sits at 65% of Americans are afraid of corrupt government officials, whereas that was way down at 50% when we started the survey. So we're not asking if people are afraid of corrupt Republicans or corrupt Democrats. We're asking corrupt government officials. So it's almost like a question for everybody. So there's some artificial reasons why that's probably high, but it is also a sign that's worrying of just general distrust in government. It doesn't matter what side of the aisle that you're on, you just think that the government is corrupt.
I mean, going from one of two people to two of three people is not small. Give me like just a minute of color on if I'm taking the survey, if I'm one of the 1,400, are you asking me, you said some of it's fixed and some of it's open-ended? Is that what it is?
No, it's all fixed. So for example, for corrupt government officials, you would be asked, how afraid are you of? And then one of the things would be corrupt government officials. Are you very afraid, somewhat afraid, not afraid at all? You would be asked to check which of those was close. And then some people just refuse to answer for some reason. They'll just leave that one blank. And so, which is the most annoying thing when you're a survey researcher, when someone leaves it blank, because then you just can't use that data. So,
but is there a box that I can click if I want to leave it blank, or they just leave it blank?
They just leave it blank. They just go on to the next one.
Interesting. And is there a heightened scale as well? Like once you know you're afraid of something, do you have people go, now rank the order of?
One of the things about surveys is that they have what they call the exhaustion limit. That's at between 20 and 22 minutes. That once you get there, basically you're getting garbage answers. And we can think of this all when you take one of those surveys on your phone, right? You go, is this thing ever going to end? And by the time you get to screen 25, you just start going, whatever, and start clicking. So an abundance of research and survey takers knows that you've got 20 minutes. And so we unfortunately don't have time. Literally, we don't have the time to ask people about all of these things and then ask them to rank them and then ask them to give us more detail. Our hope is that, what we're trying to do is give the big, as you're talking about, the sort of 10,000 foot view. And it's our hope that other scholars, other researchers, other people like yourself will look at the data and say, you know what, I want to take this little part of it and expand. And that's why part of the thing that we're doing is we're trying to make this, and we do make it extraordinarily public. Everything is public. You can get the data. You can get the data, not just our distillation of the data and our reports. You can actually get the data and look at it yourself.
Yeah, let's do that part now. Like, where could people go to grab the data?
Sure. If they just look up, literally the easiest thing is just look up on Google or whatever, Chapman Survey of American Fears. The first hit is going to be the research center. It's called the Earl Babby Research Center, which is the home of the data. And if they go there, they will always see the most recent reports available there. And there will be links to various articles that have been written, links to getting the data. We make it open in the hopes that we're hoping that we can have a little role in just spurring greater academic interest on understanding fear.
So I'm going to go ahead and read the top 10 fears from the 24 survey. All of these clicked over 50%. So you nailed it on one. Corrupt government officials. That's one. 65%. People I love being seriously ill. 58.4%. Cyber terrorism. 58.3%. People I love dying. 57.8%. Russia using nuclear weapons, 55.8%. Not having enough money for the future, 55.7%. All right, let's stop here for 1 second. Wow. Right? Like, talk about macro and micro.
Yes.
Really, really, really toggling back and forth. I'll rattle off the rest real fast. So not having enough money, by the way, was 55.7. U.S. becoming involved in another world war, 55. North Korea using nuclear weapons, 55. Terrorist attack, 52.7. Biological warfare, 52.5. So what a top 10 list we've got here, right?
Yeah, pretty joyful top 10 list there, right? So
I do find it interesting that the first five, right? The first five really feels out of everyone's control. It isn't like, I guess I could run for office, right? If people do, this is enough of this. The government's corrupt. I'm running for office, right? But most people don't, right? And so, yeah, people I love being seriously ill, like We know that's going to happen at some point. Cyber terrorism out of my control. People I love dying. We know that's going to happen at some point. Russia using a nuclear weapon. Like all five of them, as a guy that's in the courage business, like I'm not sure how my courage would help me solve any. So is this part of the fear? I know you said the unknown, but is it also, not only is it unknown, but it's like out of my control?
Absolutely. That we definitely find, and this is not something that we have found ourselves, even in the earliest research on fear. It's been known that fear is highly related to uncertainty and feelings of control. To what extent do you feel like you can control? And I would say really for the most part, we could quibble about whether not having enough money for the future has to do with your own habits and your own savings or larger market forces that are beyond your control. But I would say really that top 10 for the most part, with 6 being a little questionable, are all items that are out of your control. And definitely that we find that when people express uncertainty, when they don't think that they have control, that leads to higher levels of fear.
The what's the lesson? I'm like, so if I'm as the, hey, we're in academia, right? So like, what's the lesson here? Like, what do I do with this information?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say that we have found, and it will connect to what we're talking about here. It might seem a little bit diversionary for a moment, but we have found that people's media habits are extraordinarily tied to their fears. Particularly, social media is extraordinarily tied to fears, and that people's fears tend to go up the more that they're consuming this type of material. And the thing is that if you're looking at social media, you're going to only see, for the most part, the most dramatic thing that is happening at the time, right? I joke when it comes to crime that you never see a news story about 2 guys getting in a fist fight at a bar about the Packers game or something. And that's the most common form of crime, is a couple of guys assaulting each other. But you don't hear about it. What we hear about in the news is the most terrible event that's happening. So one thing that we can do is, and this will help with all of these items where we feel like they're out of our control, is understanding that the reason that we're hearing about something in the first place is because it's rare. That I think almost the greatest definition of what is covered by the news is that it is something that is not happening very much. That you never hear a news story about something that everybody's doing all the time. It's generally about rare events. I think that's the first thing you can do, is that there are some things you can't control, but you can understand that if you're feeling out of control is because you are seeing the worst of what's happening when you're looking at the news. And not only that, but unfortunately with these algorithms, once you see one of these stories, you get filtered more.
I'm thinking about the next hour for you. So when you leave me, you're going to go to a bunch of 19, 18, 20-year-old kids. And by the way, the definition of kids, like I'm thinking about the survey. What's the age? 20?
18 and over is what we can survey. Yeah.
Okay. If you just polled, it was unfair, right? Like 13. I just watched Adolescence, so that's where we are here. I'm just putting it there. Okay. Have you watched it yet?
I have not seen it yet. It's on my list. But
okay, so you're taking your own advice and you're not watching some of the media, right? But my wife and I watched it this week, and we're just sort of like gravity. It was all fear, but the right fear so I could be a better parent. Audience, if you haven't seen Adolescence, Netflix, check it out. If you polled, maybe it's unfair, but if you polled like 12 to 18, what do you think would fall in the top 10 list?
Well, I'd only be speculating, okay, because part of our ethical, we have to use ethical practices when we're doing studies. And one of the biggest boundaries is not interviewing or researching people under the age of 18 unless you've gone through training and I've gotten all these approvals and all that. So to be clear, I would just be speculating. What I can say is that when we have focus groups and people on the younger end are in those focus groups, those 18, 19-year-olds, they will tend to say that the types of things we're missing from our list are a lot to do with social interactions. That I learned about FOMO from one of these focus groups, fear of missing out. And we thought about including it, but we're finding that basically it just was showing up at 4 or 5%, the people who are 18-year-olds in our survey. A lot about social media, I would expect a lot of fears about being preyed upon by social media, being asked to provide nude pictures or something like that, or blackmailed on social media, that definitely see amongst the younger folks in our focus groups a lot of fears that are related to the way they interact today.
When you talk to your kids about all this, are they surprised by the list of 10, or are they just like locked in on to your point? I mean, they're living in a whole different world than we are, right? I mean, look, I'm on social media plenty, but like are they in the other world? I think they're only in social media. Like
I think they are always in social media. Yeah. I think the thing that I find most surprising with my own kids and with younger people that I interact with is I don't blame people for the fact that they are interested in the strangest murder that's happening or the strangest event that's happening. It's what I try to convince my sons of and other people of is, if you're interested in it, that's fine. Just don't then mistake that interest for commonality. That is the disconnect I see with not just young people, with a lot of people. You can see this just in these sort of political silos that people get into, that they just, whatever silo that they're in, it doesn't matter which side, they assume that when they see one story about a terrible thing a Republican did or a terrible thing a Democrat did, they don't understand that, okay, if we've heard about one of these, that's probably the worst person. And then if we're filtered another, that doesn't mean that this is now common. And I think that is the biggest disconnect. I don't actually blame the media at all for making more movies about serial killers than they do domestic violence, because they know what we want to go and watch. I'm just as guilty as anyone else. If a crime show comes on and it's some sort of scary serial killer, I might watch it. The only difference between me and some people who don't think about it in this way is just I don't then assume that there's a serial killer outside my house. I understand that I am viewing this because it is rare and strange, not because it's the tip of the iceberg. And I think that's a big disconnect. And I think that's a big disconnect that I see even more amongst younger people. Is they just think that what they're seeing on social media is the world, not the worst and best parts and most unusual parts of the world.
right, you're on the fringe. You're only seeing the FOMOs, right?
Yeah.
Or just the flat out fear, right?
Yeah.
Right.
You're seeing both the best and the worst at all times. You're never seeing what is actually going on, just the best thing that happened and the worst thing that happened, the most hilarious thing that happened and the scariest thing that happened. And so that's fine as long as you don't then take that out and assume that that's the way the world operates.
So I want to make sure I don't kind of bury what I perceive to be the takeaway, right? I mean, one, what a cool decade for you. And even when things are uncertain or out of my control, right, the one thing I can do is maybe turn off the news, like just make sure I show moderation in what I'm consuming, whether it's social or the news. The amount of times I've said, hey, fear and courage are kin. I don't think you can get to courage without fear, but I still think courage is a journey word. I don't see it as a destination word. Like, to me, the outcome of when I'm scared and I do something anyway, when I say I'm scared, I don't mean a terrorist attack, obviously, or biological warfare. But in my life, when I'm afraid to do something, when I actually get through it and do it, usually on the other side of that is relevance, something meaningful. And almost always, although it doesn't feel like it in the moment, some sort of happiness component. And I've said, I think being courageous actually makes you happier. I don't have a survey of a decade to prove this, but from the people that I've spoken to, there is something interesting to bridging it all and saying, if I'm in my 20s, I'm listening to this show, and if what you are watching is getting in the way of you taking action on the thing you should actually be doing, right? How much time would be saved if you just turned off? By the way, guilty as charged, including this podcast. Turn this off, go get yourself a pad of paper and start taking action on the thing that you know you should be doing, which should take your mind off of things you can't control, like corrupt government officials, people that you love getting sick, cyber terrorism, all those things. Is there like when you put out the survey, Do you have an executive summary like that says, hey, like, do you go Hallmark special on America, or do you stay out of that space?
I mean, in the reports that we put out, we're just trying to factually represent, here's what Americans said. And really, we save the commentary, if you want to call it that, for books and for interviews like this, because because the things that I'm saying are my opinion. I believe they're informed opinions based on what I've seen, but they are my opinion. And we want to separate that out from the data that we're collecting. That anyone is free to go download the data, do all the analysis, and say, Dr. Bader is wrong and all these things. I don't care about that. I really don't, because as an academic, I want to see our knowledge get better, not me be right. So I try to separate those things. I would say there's one other takeaway, if you don't mind, besides just sort of turn off the TV, or turn off the TV. Now that aged me right there, right? The other thing I would say is connect with people. Unfortunately, one of the things that fear tends to do, fear of crime does this immensely, is it tends us to withdraw. Not only is connection good, it tends to reduce fear for a lot of different reasons. That when you connect with people, it tends to lead you to understand those people better. It reduces xenophobia, your fear of strangers, your fear of people who are not like you. One of the biggest predictors over time of acceptance of other groups is meeting someone from that group. Unfortunately, we don't seem to just on a theoretical level say, okay, I should be nice to people who aren't like me. It sometimes takes meeting people. So not only that, but withdrawal has the exact opposite effect that people think it's going to do. We think withdrawal makes us safer. We withdraw because we're afraid of crime, afraid of terrorism. Actually makes us far more at risk. I'll just give you a quick example. That let's suppose that in your neighborhood, there starts to be a rumor going around, or there's been a crime that happens in a local park. And the response to that by the local neighborhood can be, then I'm scared, I'm not going to that park anymore. Guess what you've done? You've made the park monumentally more dangerous by doing that. That when we retreat, that's a vacuum that will be filled in. And the best thing that you can do, actually, if there's something bad happens in your neighborhood, is actually, instead of withdrawing, connect. Go to that space. That will make your neighborhood better. That will make you safer. And that's one thing that is a direct consequence of fear, even when it's not of something like crime. That when people get afraid, they tend to withdraw, when one of the best responses is to actually connect.
You actually also making me think of the bar scene, except maybe it's not two Packer fans. It's a Packer fan and a Viking fan. They can tell together, have a beer, work it through. But it's kind of that, right? It's the opposite of withdrawing. We make up these stories in our minds, and we assume that's, this is what fear does to us.
It does. Yeah.
Random question. What's one fear you wish more Americans had?
That's a good question. I wish more Americans were afraid of, I'm not sure the right term, because I'm just going to throw the term out there, but then explain disinformation. And what I mean by that is just that we're not critical enough of our own consumption habits. And I think a worrying thing that I see is just that again, I keep talking about politics, but if you love right-wing channels, fine, go view them. If you love left-wing channels, fine, go view them. But the lack of recognition that is what you are viewing, and that it is showing you a skewed view, is what's troubling. And the fact that once you go down any one of these various channels, you're going to be fed more of that exact thing. That is something that it doesn't matter who I talk to. Anyone who's down an information silo, I call it, just simply says, you're wrong. You're a weird academic. No, what I'm learning is the truth. And I wish people were more afraid of the way that they're being fed information.
Do you have certain laws now? Like, and again, if you don't want to bring me into your house, completely fine. But are you like, no TV in the room, or like no, the cell phones are not next to the bed, or I feel like for some reason all of my things are about screens now. Do you have certain, or let's not make this about you. Let's make this about us. Is there 3 big sort of requests you have for us on consumption?
I think one would be disconnect throughout the day. I have my phone. It's sitting here next to me. I get emails on it. I have to connect too, but I think disconnect is the big thing. And I would say, really, for me, it's about disconnecting occasionally and awareness. I don't mind that my kids are playing video games or that they're watching shows. It's just sometimes we will talk about, we'll just understand that what you're seeing is fictional, or is a sort of very windowed view on the world.
So we've been talking to Dr. Chris Bader. You also have a number of books. One of them, obviously, on the topic, Fear Itself, The Nature and Consequences of Fear in America. Pick that puppy up at Amazon. Did you do an Audible? Did you guys do the Audible on that?
We have not done an Audible yet. Maybe we should.
I mean, the just the music itself, right? Could be a lot of fun.
That's true. That's true.
Dramatic suspense. Chapman has an excellent communication school. It feels like a partnership opportunity.
That's a good point.
Right?
Yeah,
right.
That's a good point.
Just try to save a couple bucks here. Obviously, people are still here. They're curious of this topic. How would you like to wrap with folks?
I think we've sort of been cycling around these things for a while here, but I would say that really just don't be as afraid as you are. That the world is a scary place. Obviously, there's always things going on, but in many ways, the world is becoming safer over time. But our awareness of those things that are not safe is getting more pronounced over time. So I would say just all I would ask any of your listeners to do is just to have more awareness about the nature of the information they're consuming and how it's being fed to them versus trying to disconnect from it altogether.
And I'd like to add, for those of you who are competitive and want to get ahead, I mean, the data speaks for itself. Like when I talk to guys like Nicholas Alp, who's, Cambridge PhD and studying our brains, it's like 95% of us are freeze or flight and only 5% of us are fighters. So if you're in a room with 100 people, 95 of us are getting caught up on a fear, and it's causing that paralysis, which means if you can be part of the 5%, that is a massive competitive advantage for anybody that's going for it and taking the leap. So I like both points. I like that, hey, make sure you know where you're getting your information from, and maybe fear not, as the language says. And then for those of you who do leap, knowing that most people can't get out of their own way, that there is an opportunity for you to go make that thing. I mean, maybe last question. What was your biggest fear about putting a survey together on fears?
I didn't have one, actually. I'm not, I think the one thing I'm not afraid of is I'm not afraid of trying these things and failing. I mean, what's the worst that could happen if we did the survey and, let's say here's a worst case scenario. We ask this survey and we find that nobody's afraid of any of those things. And so we've really got nothing to analyze. Well, that would be a great thing. Unfortunately, I knew before we even gave the survey that we were going to find high levels of fear. It was very prevalent in the culture. It was very obvious. But no, I was not afraid of it, because my perspective on the work that I do is that I want people to, I'm interested in opening up research agendas and of having other people work on fear. And if somehow our understanding of fear is better and has had some sort of positive impact in 20 or 30 years, and I was somehow a part of that, great. If I wasn't, but the knowledge is better, even that's great. So,
I guess I have to ask, are you peeking over the fence at the 25 survey? Like anything you can share?
We don't have a back yet, but it's literally in the field right now. So I don't have a early number or anything that we'll know in a few weeks.
Are you allowed to make hypotheses or no? Any hunches?
What's really big, and this is part of the reason why you do it over time, is that the survey is going to naturally be somewhat colored by the exact time at which it's administered, right? If the survey just randomly happens to go out right after a huge earthquake, earthquakes are going to go up, right? This one went out in the field in mid-March, I believe. So new president, very controversial, a lot of stuff going on, a lot of stuff related to the economy, a lot of stuff related to, at the time that the survey was going out, there was a lot of discussion about staff at national parks being cut. There was a lot of talk of tariffs going on at the time. So I believe that we do have a lot of fears about ecological disasters and pollution. My prediction will be those will be higher on the list this year because of what was on people's minds at the time. Conversations about potentially logging national parks, all that stuff sort of in the national discussion at the time. I expect that economic fears will rise. I would expect that fears about running out of money, those types of things will be at 2 and 3. Those are my guesses. I don't know. I wish I had peeked at it so I could look really smart when it comes out, but I don't know.
So we've got this podcast recorded right mid or early part of the year, which we'll come back to. Is losing my job or not finding a job somewhere on the 88 fear?
Yes, it is. It is. So I expect that could be up there.
That's coming up.
So I just generally think things related to the economy, a great economic collapse, that an economic collapse will happen in the country so I expect those will be up higher. I don't expect that North Korea using nuclear weapons will still be in the top 10. At the time this survey was collected the last time, North Korea was making some threats that way. Be interesting to see maybe health related fears as well because of RFK. So when we've given a survey before and it's sort of near the beginning, when we gave the survey before near the beginning of after Trump was elected the first time, a lot of fears related to things he was talking about were spiked up, and I expect the same thing here.
And my prediction, and I can get away with this because I'm not going to be tied to the data at all, is that corrupt government officials, I still think is number one, and I'm curious.
I agree. Yeah.
Will it hit 70%? I am very curious. Will it get? That's a lot of people, and then I still think people I love becoming seriously ill is too, because those are the people I want to talk to about the corrupt government. Right now, I can't talk to anybody. All right, Dr. Bader, Chris, thanks so much, man. I really appreciate your time. What an awesome study, great insights, and where can people find you if they want to run you down?
If they just they should search Christopher if they search my name, because there's actually several academics named Chris Bader. But if they look up Christopher Bader, they can find the other books and the articles that I've written. You can look me up on Google Scholar if you want to look at articles. I'm woefully behind. I don't have a web page or a Wikipedia page or anything like that yet. So you'll just have to go the hard way. Just look me up on Google or Amazon. My books are all on Amazon. I have an author page on there. So.
Again, guys, the fear itself, the causes and consequences of fear in America. And then we've been talking about the Chapman survey of American fears going on the 11th year. Thanks so much, Christopher. Appreciate you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Courageous Podcast. If you enjoy the show, don't forget to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts so more people can find us. See you again next week.